Hello, in this video I will explain how to create or add new data to a table. This part would be the part of how to create or add new data to a table in Laravel with Ajax. From a Laravel CRUD and Ajax example. First, what I'm going to do is go to Roots, Web, PHP, and create a root with Post, with products, and the store, as URL. And use the class of the products controller, and the store that would be for the public function store that is in the products controller, PHP. Then I go to products controller, PHP, and create the public function store with the request. And then I create the validator, which is equal to validator with the make and the request to validate the form. Then I create the example name, which is equal to required example description, which is equal to required example code, which is equal to required. Then I create the error message with the required. Then I create an if with the validator, which would be so that in case it fails, an error appears in response. So I create a return with response. And the JSON with the status, which is equal to 422. And the error, which is equal to validator, and the messages. And I close. Then I create an else, and in it I create the product to create, which would be for the table. Example name with the request, and example name. Example code with the request, and example description with the request, and the example description. And I close. Then I create a return with the response, and the JSON, which would have, as a response, the status, which is equal to 200, and the product, which is equal to the product of create. Then I close. Then when we already have the table, and also the on-click of the button to create, which in this case would be on-click, create, product, and the ID, in that table. Then I create the modal, to add the data. The modal div has the ID, of add, formulary, modal. And, in the modal body, the form would be found. And, there would be what would be added in the table. Example, name. Example, description. And, example, code. And, then I create a button with type submit. And, the ID, save, add, formulary, btn. And, I close the modal. Then I create in the JS section the create product JS, and I close. In the create product JS, I create the create product function, which would be to show the modal, and that the modal appears without completing. Then I create the save, add formulary, btn, which would use the store product function when clicking, which is then I would develop. Then I create the store product function, the save, add formulary, btn. It would be the one that changes the property from disabled to true. Then I create a let URL, which would be for the URL. Then I create a let data, which would be for the table data. And I create the 3 of the table. And I close. Then I create the Ajax. And I develop it so that it works. First I create the headers. Then the URL. The type, which in this case is post. And the data, it would be data. Then when the response is successful, the save, add, formulary, btn, would convert the disabled property to false. Then I create a let so that an alert appears. And I create an alert div, HTML, with that alert, which in this case would be success, HTML. Then I create the 3 of the table with eval, without completing. I would also use the show all products, which would be the function to display the data. And finally I would hide the modal with hide, and close. Then I create the error, so that it shows the errors. In this case the save, add, formulary, btn, I would convert the disabled property to false. Then I create the validation errors, which would be those that would be in the validation error messages. In this case it would be errors in case it shows an error. The errors response appears. I create a let errors, with the response, and the errors. Then I create a let for the table errors. In this case I create a let with example, description, validation, and I close. And then I create an if, so that when the values are not completed, an error appears. In this case it would be example description validation, and I equal it to a li, with errors, example, description, and the 0. And I close the li. In this case the error would be shown in case of not completing. Then the same would be done with the example name validation and the example code validation. Then I create a let error HTML with the alert, with the error message, and that shows the 3 error messages, and I close. The div with ID error div would be what shows the errors. Then I close, and close would be the function. That would be all.